Is that everything you need, Chris?
That's everything today. Thank you very much.
Great. And that just goes on your account?
Yeah, just put it on my account. Go home, Maddie.
Have a good one.
All right, so I'm going to give you some tips and tricks caulking right here, doing sponge caulking. I've got a door jamb right here, and I'm going to show you how I go about caulking a door jamb like this. It hasn't been caulked before, it's been painted, but just some tips and tricks getting really nice, clean, full corners, getting nice beads, on your open seams and stuff like this, cracks and crevices. I always use a sponge like this. I call it a caulking sponge, and they're sold at Paint Life Supply Co. as a caulking sponge, but in reality, I think they're actually tile sponges. Tile guys use them for grouting and stuff like that, but painters use them for caulking, so I call them a caulking sponge. When I'm doing any type of caulking and I want really good quality beads, corners and stuff like that, or a good bond to both surfaces, I'm going to be using Tower Tech 2 elastomeric, urethane elastomeric sealant. Now, this is the everyday caulking that I use, interior and exterior. The reason why I like it is the consistency of it is not too wet and it's not too dry. There's nothing worse than caulking that's really dry, because what I say is it's not very toolable. You can't work with it and stuff and get a good bead with it because it's just not wet enough. This is kind of the perfect consistency. Very rarely do you get pops with it, so that's really nice. Also, being a urethane elastomeric sealant, the bonding capabilities, it will fill bigger gaps, it'll bond really good to two surfaces and won't separate and crack. But I'm going to be using a towel sponge. I always keep a bucket of water with me, that way, because I'm going to be rinsing it out all the time, because I'm using it for a couple purposes: to keep my hands clean. Any excess caulking I'm going to be wiping on here, but in order to get really nice corners, really nice beads, you always need your pads, your fingers you're working with, to be wet. And if you're trying to caulk and lay out your caulking with dry fingers, you're just not going to have a lot of success. I also use it to keep my gun tip clean. You'll typically get some run-ons and stuff on the end of your gun, and that's just kind of going to make a mess on your surface. So I'm typically wiping my gun corner off before I start my bead. I'm going to start up here, just going to do some corners. You can typically, this stuff doesn't dry super fast, so you can caulk this whole door jamb with your caulking before you lay it out, and you're not going to have to worry about it drying or coagulating. I'm just going to put a small bead on there. I typically just cut a 45-degree angle on my gun, and I don't want the hole to be too big, because I don't want my bead of caulking to be too large either. Keep a nice, smooth, consistent speed, and every time I'm always wiping it off before I start caulking again. So I wipe. It's kind of just, I do it subconsciously. I'll be working this corner right here, so I want to have all edges of it right there done. I can do this whole jamb, this side of the jamb, and not worry about it drying. If I'm outside and it's warm, I probably wouldn't do this part of it. If you got large cracks, make sure you slow down so your caulking fills that crack. So now I'm going to start wiping it off. I'm going to wet my finger, lay out my bead, wipe off the excess. So wiping off the excess re-wets your finger. That's why I call it sponge caulking, because I'm using a caulking sponge to lay out with. Now when it comes to these corners, I want my corners to be perfect. I'm very particular about how much caulking I leave behind. So I'm going to get this thing, I'm just going to keep wiping my finger. You'll see me keep wiping it, wetting it. If your finger is really wet, the caulking becomes very toolable and very workable. So just keep wetting it, keep taking out as much out of that corner to get it to the point where I like it. You see, I'm constantly wetting my finger if I don't wet it in between every swipe, your finger is going to get too dry. When I was doing new construction, we were so particular on our corners, we would ask the builders, you want full corners or empty corners? So we would wipe out more caulking and get the corners less full. And some builders liked them full, some liked them less full. That's how particular we were about our corners. Really like my corners really nice. And there's some chunks and stuff that should have been sanded first, but just wanted to shoot this video and show you how to sponge caulk before it's actually sanded. We typically do our sanding first and then caulk. You can see this, I put this on last and it's still not dry. It's nice and cool in here, but that's starting to coagulate a little bit, but by wetting my finger, it re-wets the top of the caulking. And now my door jamb is caulked. Got a kind of a little bit fuller corner there, a little more of an empty corner right there. And this is what my sponge looks like. Now if you're putting on too much caulking, you're gonna have a lot more caulking on that sponge. It's better to have it on your sponge than have it on the door. In between each side of the door jamb, I'm just going to take my sponge, rinse this caulking out. Being an elastomeric sealant is water-based. It'll clean right out of your sponge pretty fast. So I like to keep my sponge nice and clean. Now, how wet do you want your sponge? I want this sponge, I don't want it too wet because I don't want my hands to be too wet. I just want them damp. So I'm gonna squeeze as hard as I can, get all that water out. Now I also like my hands clean because if you start to get caulking built up around your hand, what I call caulking boogers, it's not going to give you a good smooth bead. You want the pads of your finger. If I typically work with this finger, it's kind of interesting. I had a friend that he could actually caulk with all 5 fingers just as good as he could with, I think this is your index finger. I primarily use my index finger. So keep that thing clean, don't get caulking built up on it. Now I'm just going to move over and caulk the other side, and you'll see caulking starts to get built up on my tip. I wipe my tip, and I'm ready to go.
David, what are we—
Shut up.
You shut up.
You shut up.
You shut up?
You shut up.